Hello, today we'll do a poem called A Considerable Speck by the American poet Robert Frost. Robert Frost was a prize winning poet who managed to earn his livelihood by the writing of his poetry. So, he was one of the few writers who was able to earn his bread and butter through his writings. So he's Pulitzer Prize winning, Nobel Prize winning poet, I think, and he was also the poet laureate of the US. So he has written many famous poems like Mending Wall, Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, uh, and others. So here we have a poem called A Considerable Speck by Robert Frost. So, what is a speck? A speck is a small dot, a minute object, a very small object. So, how can a minute or a small or a minuscule or a tiny thing be considerable? How can it be worthy of consideration? What is it that makes it? What is it that makes it? Worthy of notice? A small thing. So here, let's read the poem. It says, "A speck that would have been beneath my sight on any but a paper sheet so white, set off across what I had written there." So the poet was in his study. He was writing something at his table. On his table, he had a sheet of paper, a white sheet of paper, and he was writing something on that with ink. So, in the days of Robert Frost, there were no ball pens. He had to write it with liquid ink. So, as he was writing, something that was too tiny to for the poet to recognize what it is, too tiny for the poet to see what it is. Uh, it, it almost escaped his notice. It was beneath his sight, but uh, on that sheet of paper, which is so white, it's it's set off from one corner of the page to the other. So he had written something there, and it started walking across the sheet of paper. And because the paper was so white, the poet noticed it. It was a black, small speck on that sheet of paper, and it was moving. And the poet was in a thoughtful mood. He was thinking about what to write, he was pondering, and as he was thinking or pondering, he had idly lifted his pen, and he says, and I had idly poised my pen in air to stop it with a period of ink. So he thought of drowning that creature in his ink. He thought of, squirting that insect or mite or whatever it was with a small drop of ink from his pen. And that would have marked its period. It would have been drowned. Period mark means the end. So that insect or whatever it was would have been drowned. When something strange about it made me think this was no dust speck by my breathing blown, but unmistakably a living mite. So he almost drowns it in some ink, but something about that speck made him think, and he thinks that it's not a piece of dust blown there by his breathing. It's not a piece of dust which is floating in the air and is blown there by his breathing, but unmistakably it was a living mite. It was a living insect. With inclinations it could call its own. So, like all living things, that mite or insect, that small creature, had its own inclinations. That is, it had some wishes. Maybe it is to find a place of shelter right then, or maybe it was to find some food, or maybe it was to escape from the danger. So it had inclinations it could call its own. So the mite guesses what the poet is about to do. It senses what is about to do. So it paused as with suspicion of my pen, and then came racing wildly on again. So it paused for a minute. It suspected what the poet would do with his pen, and to escape from the danger, it started to run. So it started to try to escape from the danger it's facing, and it raced wildly on the sheet of paper to where my manuscript was not yet dry. So the poet had written something on that piece of paper on his manuscript, and the insect or the mite wanted to hide itself in the black marks. So it would have been camouflaged, it would have been covered, it would have been hidden by the black marks on the sheet of paper. So it raced to where the manuscript was not yet dry. The ink had not yet dried. Then paused again and either drank or smelled with loathing, for again it turned to fly. So as it came near the ink on what the poet with which the poet had written something, uh, it either drank the ink or it smelt the ink, and it loathed the smell or the taste of ink, and it turned to fly. So the poet says, plainly with an intelligence I dealt. So it is obviously an intelligence. So it has shows all the signs of wanting to preserve itself. It shows signs of wanting to find something like food. So it is plainly an intelligence with which the poet dealt with at that time. And the poet inspects it and he says, it seemed too tiny to have room for feet. So it is almost like nothing but a pair of wings and an abdomen and head. So uh, it's, it seemed too tiny to have room for feet. It was so small, yet must have had a set of them complete. Yet the poet thinks, like all living things, it too must have had a set of legs, complete legs. So it might have four legs, or it might have three pairs of legs, like many insects do. It must have had a set of them complete to express how much it didn't want to die. So legs are primarily used by organisms to escape from danger. So the poet thinks it wanted to express how much it didn't want to die by using its legs. It ran with terror and with cunning crept. So it was overcome by fear, and it creeped along the paper with cunning. It faltered, it hesitated, it couldn't decide which way to go. I could see it hesitates. Then, in the middle of the open sheet, cower down in desperation to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. So, in the middle of the sheet, it just sank down. It almost seemed to collapse, and it had resigned itself to its fate. Whatever the poet did next, that would be its fate. Whether he drowned it in ink, whether he squashed it with his thumb, whether he flicked it with his finger to make it, to get it off the sheet of paper to make, and then give it life, whatever the poet had accorded it of its fate, whatever the poet had decided to make it live or die, it resigned it, it cowered down in desperation. And the poet says, I have none of the tenderer than thou collectivistic regimenting love with which the modern world is being swept. So the poet says, in the modern world, people are too friendly with each other. There's a collectivistic. Collectivistic means that it uh, it spreads across the whole of humanity, and it's regimenting. Regimenting means it's like uh, orderly. It is almost the rule, the unwritten rule, that everybody should love each other, everybody should care for each other, and everybody should be concerned or considerate of each other. And the poet says, he has none of that tenderer than thou. So I am tenderer than you, and you are tenderer than me. So we should treat each other with tenderness. The poet says he has none of that tenderer than thou, collectivistic regimenting love with which the modern world is being swept. So the modern world is swept with this uh, care and concern for others. And he says he has none of that. But this poor microscopic item now. So he doesn't really care much about that insect, but he considers this poor microscopic item now, this insect which can only be visible under a microscope. Since it was nothing I knew evil of, I let it lie there till I hope it slept. So he doesn't know anything, that he doesn't think it's evil, he doesn't think it's bad. So he just lets it lie there and he hopes it went to sleep. And the poet finally gives the moral of the poem. He says, I have a mind myself and recognize mind when I meet it with any guise. No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. So he says, the poet says, he has a mind himself. He is intelligent. He is able to use his mind. He is able to use his, you know, uh, his rationality, intelligence, and so on. And because he has intelligence, he recognizes another form of intelligence whenever he meets it, in any guise. It can be a person, and now it is in the form of this mite or in this form of this insect. And he says he is intelligent and he recognizes intelligence in the insect. No one can know, he says, how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. So the poet says that on sheets of paper, much is printed. Millions and millions of books come out every year in the world, and much is published, but little printed. So there are a lot of books published, but there's hardly anything of real value in those millions and millions of books. So he says that whenever he sees any intelligence on any sheet of paper, as he's doing then with that might, then he says no one can guess how glad he is to find, intelligence displayed on a sheet of paper. So, and this is the poem, A Considerable Speck. So the poet thinks that this mite, this insect, or this speck is worthy of his consideration because it shows signs of life. So, thank you.